It's October, the days are getting shorter, and without deciding to, you've started eating more. You tell yourself it's just comfort food season. You tell yourself it's the holidays coming early. You tell yourself it's stress. But the real answer is far stranger. Your body is preparing for a winter that isn't coming. Right now, somewhere inside your brain, a signal is firing that has nothing to do with pumpkin spice or holiday parties. It's older than agriculture, older than fire. It's a survival program written into you by ancestors who didn't know if they'd eat again once the snow came, and it's still running every single autumn. You just don't notice it because nothing around you looks like winter anymore. You have a heated apartment, you have a grocery store open at midnight, you have a refrigerator humming quietly in the next room, stocked with more calories than a hunter-gatherer would see in a month. None of that matters to the program. The program doesn't check your fridge, it checks the sun. For most of human history, the shortening of daylight was the single most reliable warning system your ancestors had. No calendars, no weather forecasts, just light slowly draining out of the sky day after day, and that light was doing something to their brains long before they felt cold. Deep inside your skull sits a small cluster of cells called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It sits right behind your eyes, and its entire job is counting daylight. As the days shrink, it changes how much melatonin your brain releases when your body wants to sleep, and even how much serotonin is available to regulate your mood. This isn't a metaphor. This is measurable biology. In the early 1980s, a psychiatrist named Norman Rosenthal noticed something strange in his patients. Every autumn, without fail, a subset of them would slide into depression. Every spring, without fail, they'd climb back out. He didn't call it sadness. He called it seasonal affective disorder, and his research at the National Institute of Mental Health helped prove that human mood itself has a seasonal clock running underneath it. Your ancestors didn't have a name for this, they just felt it. The pull towards sleep, the drop in energy, the urge to slow down, hunker in, conserve. That wasn't weakness, that was preparation, because winter used to be a filter. It killed the unprepared. If your ancestors hadn't stored enough fat, hadn't gathered enough food, hadn't built enough shelter by the time the cold set in, they didn't survive to have children. Which means the ones who did survive, the ones whose genes made it all the way down to you, were the ones whose bodies were exceptionally good at panicking about scarcity in advance. That panic had a name, decades before anyone connected it to your autumn cravings. In 1962, a geneticist named James Neel proposed something called the thrifty gene hypothesis. His idea was simple and unsettling. Populations that survived repeated cycles of feast and famine would evolve bodies that stored fat aggressively whenever food was available, because the ones who didn't store enough simply didn't make it through the lean season. You are, quite literally, descended from the best fat storers in your ancestral line. Think about that for a second. Not the strongest, not always the smartest. Often just the ones whose bodies were the most anxious about running out. And that anxiety didn't disappear when supermarkets appeared. It's still sitting in your hormones, waiting for a trigger it recognizes. And the trigger it recognizes best is shortening daylight. Researchers studying circannual rhythms, the yearly cycles that regulate everything from hibernation in animals to migration in birds, have found that mammals across dozens of species show measurable shifts in appetite and fat storage as daylight drops, completely independent of temperature. It's not the cold that starts the process, it's the dark. Which is why you can feel this pull in a climate-controlled office building in a city that hasn't seen real winter in a decade. Your thermostat doesn't matter, your calendar doesn't matter, your eyes are still doing the ancient math. There's a researcher named Alfred Lewy who spent years studying exactly how light regulates melatonin release in humans, work that eventually helped explain why some people's internal clocks drift so far out of sync with shortened winter daylight that their whole mood and metabolism shift with it. His research on light therapy became one of the most effective treatments for seasonal depression, precisely because it targets the same biological trigger your ancestors were responding to for 100,000 years. Not mood, light. So here's what's actually happening to you in October. Daylight drops. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus registers it. Melatonin patterns shift. Serotonin availability drops slightly. Your appetite regulation loosens. particularly for calorie-dense food, because calorie-dense food used to mean the difference between making it to spring and not making it at all. Your brain isn't being lazy, it's not being greedy, it's running the same emergency protocol your great-great-great-grandparents needed to survive a season that could kill them. The problem is, it can't tell the difference between an actual famine and a Tuesday in November. It doesn't know that food is 15 feet away in a climate-controlled kitchen. It doesn't know your job doesn't require gathering. It doesn't know that no matter how cold it gets outside, you are not going to run out of calories. All it knows is the light dropped, and when the light drops, store fat, slow down, conserve energy, sleep more, crave more. This is why, if you've ever felt genuinely confused about your own autumn cravings, the confusion makes sense. You're not fighting a lack of discipline, you're fighting a program built for a world that mostly doesn't exist anymore. And it's not just food. Watch how people behave in late autumn. Watch how many of them start pulling inward, canceling plans, wanting fewer people around, wanting more blankets, more warmth, more stillness. Some researchers have connected this seasonal withdrawal to the same ancient conservation strategy, an instinct to reduce activity and social exposure when resources might be scarce. You call it introversion season or just being tired. Your ancestors would have called it staying alive until spring. Here's the part that should really sit with you. This program isn't broken. It's not a flaw in your biology. It's working exactly as designed. The problem isn't your body. The problem is that the world changed faster than your biology could. 10,000 years ago, this instinct meant the difference between a population that made it to the next generation and one that didn't. Today, in a world of year-round grocery stores and indoor heating, that same instinct just means an extra few pounds and a harder time getting out of bed in December. Same wiring, completely different world. And once you see it this way, autumn stops feeling like a personal failure and starts feeling like something much older. A message arriving on schedule every single year from a version of your ancestors who had every reason to be afraid of the dark half of the calendar. You don't have to obey the message the way they did. You know things they didn't. You know the food isn't actually running out. You know the light will come back in March the same way it always has. But it's worth noticing the pull when it arrives. Worth noticing that the extra hunger, the extra tiredness, the urge to stay in and store up isn't randomness. It's memory, written into cells, not thoughts. Passed down by ancestors who didn't get the luxury of understanding why they felt what they felt. You do get that luxury. That's the difference. So tonight, when the days keep getting shorter and you feel that old pull toward the fridge, toward the blanket, toward doing less and eating more, you don't have to fight it like it's a personal weakness. You can just recognize it for what it actually is. It's October, the days are getting shorter, and your body is still preparing for a winter that this year was never actually going to come.